She told me I should be with girls my age, but the truth is, there's no one like her. I had never really noticed her before, my friend's mom, that is. But that afternoon, everything felt different. I had dropped by his house to return a textbook, expecting the usual casual greeting and maybe a quick nod from her in passing. Instead, I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, a cup of coffee in hand. She wore a soft sweater, the kind that hinted at comfort rather than showiness, and the sunlight filtering through the window caught strands of her hair, making them glow like warm amber. There was an effortless grace to her, the kind that didn't demand attention but somehow drew it anyway. When I stepped inside, our eyes met, and for a brief second, the room seemed quieter. She offered a small, polite smile, the kind that suggested both welcome and hesitation. I could feel the subtle warmth of her presence before she even spoke, the faint aroma of vanilla and something woody that seemed to cling to her, comforting and oddly intoxicating. "I didn't expect to see you today," she said, her voice calm, measured, but with an undertone of curiosity. "I just thought I'd drop off this book," I replied, extending it toward her. Our fingers brushed as she took it, and a small, unexpected jolt traveled up my arm. Nothing overt, nothing inappropriate, just the warmth of her hand against mine, lingering for a heartbeat longer than usual. She laughed softly, almost to herself, and shook her head. "You should be with girls your age," she said, half teasing, half serious. Her eyes twinkled with something I couldn't quite place, wisdom, maybe, or a hint of gentle admonishment. I hesitated, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and boldness. "But, none like you," I murmured before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air between us, fragile yet charged. Her expression shifted slightly, an imperceptible lift of her eyebrows, a pause that seemed to measure the weight of my sincerity. I wanted to say more, to explain that it wasn't about age at all, that it was the quiet confidence in her gestures, the warmth in her smile, the way her laugh made the room feel lighter. But I stayed silent, letting the moment breathe, letting her presence speak for itself. For the first time, I realized that my friend's mom wasn't just a casual adult in my life. She was someone who moved differently, thought differently, and carried herself with a calm certainty that made me both nervous and captivated. And somehow, in that brief encounter, the world outside the kitchen faded, leaving just the two of us, an unspoken understanding hanging between our glances, delicate but undeniable. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop noticing her. It wasn't just her presence, it was the way she seemed to exist in the space around her, calm and unhurried, as if she carried a quiet rhythm the world naturally followed. Over the next few days, every small detail about her began to stick in my mind. I watched her in the kitchen as she stirred a pot of soup, the sleeve of her sweater sliding slightly up her arm, revealing the soft curve of her wrist. The sunlight through the window highlighted the subtle warmth of her skin. When she laughed at something my friend said, it wasn't a loud or forced laugh, but a soft, melodic sound that made the room feel lighter. I found myself imagining how it must feel to be near her, to share a quiet moment, just breathing in the same air. One evening, I lingered on the porch while my friend went inside for something, and there she was, tending to a small plant by the railing. The gentle tilt of her head, the careful attention she gave the leaves, the slight furrow in her brow, it all spoke of patience, care, and a kind of elegance that didn't need decoration. She didn't notice me at first, and I didn't want to intrude, but the way her fingers brushed against the soil, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earthiness of the plants, made the moment feel intimate in a way I couldn't explain. Sometimes, our eyes met briefly, and she would offer a polite smile, one that lingered just a fraction longer than strictly necessary. My heart would skip, not in panic, but in quiet recognition. This was someone whose presence mattered more than it should, someone who made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. I also noticed the small gestures that revealed her character, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the slight pause before she answered a question, as if she carefully weighed her words. There was confidence in her, yes, but also a gentle vulnerability I could sense, hidden beneath a polished exterior. And then there were the silent moments, sitting across from her while she read, feeling a strange pull just from the sight of her curled fingers holding a book, or catching the way her shoulders relaxed when she thought no one was watching. I wanted to tell her, somehow, that I saw it all, that I noticed the little things that made her, her. By the end of the week, I realized I wasn't just observing her, I was studying her, memorizing her in a way that felt both innocent and urgent. I knew I was crossing a line, one she herself had hinted at with her teasing remark, yet I couldn't help it. She had become more than my friend's mom in my mind, she had become someone I couldn't ignore, a quiet presence that filled every corner of my thoughts. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the moment came, unexpected, gentle, and charged with more meaning than either of us could have predicted. My friend had gone out to run errands, leaving me alone in the living room with her. I hadn't planned to stay long, but the soft light spilling through the curtains made everything feel slower, warmer, somehow more intimate. She came in carrying a tray of tea, her movements calm, deliberate, almost meditative. The aroma of chamomile mixed with the faint, comforting scent of her perfume, and I realized I was holding my breath just to take it all in. "I thought you might like a cup," she said softly, offering me the mug. Our fingers brushed as I took it, and the warmth of her hand lingered in a way that made my chest tighten with awareness. We settled on the couch, a polite distance apart at first, but the quiet made it easier to slip closer without noticing. I could hear the faint rustle of her sweater as she shifted, the delicate clink of the spoon against her cup, and it all felt like a private symphony that existed only for us. I don't know why, but some days feel heavier than others, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her tea, tracing the rim of the cup with her finger, and I could see a flicker of vulnerability, something raw and unguarded. I didn't know what to say at first. Words felt clumsy, inadequate in the face of her quiet honesty. But I reached out instinctively, letting my hand hover near hers before gently brushing the back of her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at me, and for a moment, the weight of her confession seemed lighter simply because someone was there to witness it. Her presence was magnetic, every subtle gesture, every soft sigh, seemed to speak directly to me. I noticed the slight crease of worry at her brow, the way her shoulders tensed then relaxed, the faint tremor in her voice when she laughed softly at something small. Sitting close to her, sharing that silent space, I felt a connection that went beyond words. And then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned back slightly, our knees brushing. It wasn't deliberate, not overt, but the closeness sent a quiet current through me. I realized that she trusted me enough to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't with anyone else. And in that vulnerability, a subtle intimacy bloomed, fragile yet undeniable. For the first time, I saw her not just as my friend's mom, but as a person, a woman with depth, warmth, and a quiet strength that pulled at something inside me. And even though I knew the line we weren't supposed to cross, I couldn't stop the awareness of her presence, the unspoken tension that hung softly between us, delicate, respectful, and utterly consuming. The first real sense of connection didn't come from words, it came from being together in motion, doing something ordinary, yet in a way that felt intimate. That Saturday, my friend had gone off to visit a relative, leaving me with her to tackle a small home project she'd mentioned in passing, a rickety shelf in the living room that needed fixing. I had expected it to be awkward, mechanical, a simple task done in silence. But from the moment we knelt on the floor, hands on tools, a subtle rhythm developed. She handed me the hammer with a gentle smile, her fingers brushing mine just long enough to send a spark through my arm. The warmth of her touch lingered, a quiet reminder that there was more beneath the surface of this shared activity. The sun streamed through the nearby window, casting soft patterns on the floor. I noticed how her hair caught the light, the way it fell gracefully around her shoulders, and the way she paused mid-task to brush a strand behind her ear. Every small gesture seemed deliberate, yet effortlessly natural, and I found myself savoring the details, the soft rustle of her sweater, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the smell of freshly sanded wood. We talked quietly as we worked. At first, it was simple things, the measurements, which screw went where, a shared joke about our lack of skill. But gradually, the conversation deepened. She shared stories from her past, little reflections about life and the people she had loved and lost. I listened, fascinated by the grace with which she spoke, the way her eyes softened when she recalled tender memories. At one point, our hands met again while tightening a screw, and this time, neither of us pulled away. Our fingers lingered together for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the steadiness of her hand, the subtle warmth of her skin against mine. It was unspoken, effortless, a touch that carried both comfort and the faintest thrill of something more. When the shelf was finally steady and the project completed, we sat back, leaning against the wall, breathing in sync. The room was quiet, filled only with the satisfaction of accomplishment and the gentle closeness that had developed without either of us fully noticing. I realized then that it wasn't just the physical space we shared, it was the intimacy of collaboration, the ease of being near her without pretense, the quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect and admiration. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shared laugh deepened the unspoken bond. And even as we finished the task, the subtle tension lingered, soft and patient, like the calm before a slow, inevitable storm of emotions neither of us was yet ready to name. The day had settled into a quiet, golden afternoon, the kind where the sunlight filters lazily through the curtains and everything seems to slow down. We were sitting in the living room, our legs stretched out awkwardly on the carpet, the air filled with the faint scent of tea she had prepared earlier. The shelf we had fixed together in the previous part of the day now stood sturdy against the wall, a small victory, but it felt symbolic somehow. I noticed her glancing at me from the corner of her eye, that subtle look that carried more than just curiosity, it was awareness, recognition. I felt my chest tighten slightly, a nervous anticipation I couldn't ignore. "You know," I began, my voice barely louder than a whisper, I've been thinking." I paused, unsure if I should continue, but there was something in the calm of her presence that made hesitation feel unnecessary. She tilted her head, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her mug, the soft movement sending a small thrill through me. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady, but gentle, patient, as if she already knew the answer. I swallowed, trying to frame words that wouldn't feel awkward or too forward. "About you. About how I can't stop noticing the way you move, the way you laugh, the way you just are. I know you've told me I should be with girls my age, and I know that's true. But I can't help it. There's no one like you." The room held its breath. Her eyes widened just slightly, a flicker of surprise passing over her features, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she set her mug down and extended her hand toward mine. When our fingers met, it was tentative at first, then firmer, a connection that conveyed reassurance, understanding, and something deeper that neither of us needed to name yet. The warmth of her skin against mine, the slight pressure of her thumb brushing over the back of my hand, created a quiet, electric current. I felt grounded, yet floating at the same time, a paradox I couldn't explain. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, everything else fell away, the room, the sunlight, even the weight of the age gap that had haunted my thoughts. She didn't speak immediately, and that silence was not uncomfortable, it was intimate, a shared space where unspoken emotions could breathe. I realized in that moment that trust had been established, a bridge forming between our experiences, our perspectives, and the subtle desires we had been holding back. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, warm, and steady. "I see you. I hear you. Anne. I think I understand." Her fingers lingered on mine, a silent affirmation that she, too, felt the tension, the connection, the unspoken bond that had been building for weeks. In that simple, fleeting moment, no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, we both knew that something profound had begun. The confession wasn't explosive or overwhelming, but it was enough to change the rhythm between us, to shift the air, to make every subsequent glance, every casual touch, charged with meaning. It was a rainy evening when everything seemed to crystallize, the quiet tension, the unspoken emotions, the pull between us that had been simmering for weeks. I had come over to return a book my friend had lent me, but as soon as I arrived, I sensed something different in the air. The soft patter of rain against the windows created a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, and inside, the house smelled of warm tea and faint vanilla, her presence enveloping everything. She was sitting by the window, gazing at the rain, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. When she noticed me, she offered a small smile, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a quiet vulnerability I hadn't seen before. Without thinking, I crossed the room and sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her, yet close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly. That small contact was enough to make my chest tighten, a gentle reminder of the unspoken connection between us. We talked at first about trivial things, the weather, the rain, a stray comment about my friend, but gradually the conversation shifted. She shared a worry that had been weighing on her, something personal and unspoken until that moment. Her voice wavered slightly, and I instinctively reached out, letting my hand hover near hers before brushing it gently, offering reassurance without words. She didn't pull away, instead, she leaned slightly closer, resting the side of her head against my shoulder for a fleeting, electrifying instant. The room seemed to shrink around us, the rain outside fading into a soft background hum. I noticed every subtle movement, the way her hair fell over her cheek, the warmth radiating from her hand against mine, the faint rhythm of her breathing. It was a moment suspended in time, charged with emotion yet delicate, intimate without being inappropriate. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken, the age gap, the social boundaries, the cautious restraint we had both maintained. Yet in that quiet embrace, all of it seemed to blur, replaced by a simple, profound truth: we understood each other, deeply, in a way that words alone could never convey. She finally lifted her head, our eyes meeting in a long, steady gaze. There was acknowledgement there, a silent agreement that this connection, respectful, tender, and undeniably intimate, was real. Our hands remained entwined, our shoulders pressed together, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. There were no grand declarations, no overwhelming gestures. Just the slow, undeniable realization that we had crossed into something beautiful, fragile, and transformative. The emotional peak wasn't about passion, it was about closeness, understanding, and the quiet thrill of a bond that had grown slowly, naturally, and impossibly strong. The following weekend, the world felt different, lighter somehow, infused with the quiet understanding that had grown between us over the past weeks. I arrived at her house in the late afternoon, sunlight streaming through the curtains and casting golden patterns across the floor. She was already there, tending to a small stack of books on the coffee table, her movements unhurried, graceful, familiar. When our eyes met, she smiled, not the polite, reserved smile of a casual acquaintance, but one that carried warmth, acknowledgement, and a hint of shared secrets. It made my chest tighten in a familiar, comforting way, the kind that told me this was no ordinary friendship. We decided to sit on the porch, the air cool and fresh from an earlier rain. I could smell the faint scent of jasmine from the garden, mingling with the warmth of her perfume, a combination that made the moment feel suspended in time. She poured tea for both of us, and as she handed me my cup, our fingers brushed lightly, long enough for me to feel the subtle heat of her skin, reassuring, intimate. We talked, quietly, about everything and nothing, the way the clouds moved across the sky, a small story from her childhood, a joke from my day. Each shared glance, each pause between words, was layered with meaning. The air between us was charged not with urgency, but with quiet recognition, a bond that had grown slowly, patiently, and now rested solidly in the space between us. At one point, she rested her hand on mine, fingertips brushing as naturally as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The simple gesture carried a depth I couldn't put into words: trust, admiration, and a subtle longing that didn't need to be spoken aloud. I met her gaze, and she tilted her head slightly, a gentle smile curving her lips. I just want you to know," I said softly, my voice barely louder than the whisper of wind through the trees, "that none of this feels wrong. It feels right. Just being here, with you." Her response was quiet, tender, and perfect. "I know," she said, squeezing my hand lightly. "It does. We sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of amber and rose. Fingers brushed, shoulders touched, small laughs shared, the rhythm of our breathing falling into sync. It wasn't about crossing lines or rushing towards something forbidden, it was about closeness, understanding, and the quiet joy of being seen and accepted. In that golden light, with tea cooling in our hands and the world softly fading away, I realized that what we had built was rare, a connection that transcended age, expectation, and hesitation. The bond between us was real, tender, and complete, a slow-burn love story that had finally found its quiet, perfect resolution. If you enjoyed this slow-burn story of unexpected connection, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more age-gap romance tales and heartfelt stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that surprised you? I'd love to hear your experiences.